ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Long Walk Talks. And if you clicked on this episode thinking you were listening to This Is a Work, surprise! I know that's the only content we've had for the last 2 months, but now we're back.
So I can go then, right?
No, you're still on both of these. As you hear, I am joined today by my two co-hosts, Stan Wilson Lee.
Hello.
And Chris, the Fashion Plate Barnes. And as always, I am David Hensley, owner and creative director of Long Walk Productions.
There goes your wish of having me speak on this podcast.
Yeah. It's been a minute, hasn't it?
It has been a minute. And a half, maybe.
Yeah, 2 whole months without a new episode. A lot of content coming out on This Is a Work, and even more coming out soon. But yeah, with all the delays that we experienced, we are going to combine our what were supposed to be our first 2 Quentin Tarantino episodes. Where our whole plan for this year was to discuss at length the works of Tarantino. What better time is there than a national quarantine to get together and do that? Or as we're calling it, the Quarantino.
I hadn't heard that yet.
You're welcome, Stan.
Is that one of those things that we were supposed to bring up as an accomplishment for you when you have your funeral?
Yeah, I hope you do, yes. Among everything else, coined the term Quarantino. Oh. I'm sure I didn't coin that term.
You didn't coin it?
I didn't coin it. I'm sure Quarantino has been going around for a while.
Oh, we can't talk about the butthole cut, can we? Because I was going to talk about how I coined Catigula.
I'd love to talk about
Catligula.
I'd love to talk about only that for the next hour.
Maybe on the next episode we'll talk about the butthole cut of cats. # release the butthole cut. So our original plan for the month of February was to do an overview of the TarantinoVerse, as the internet has dubbed it, which is the 10 films of Quentin Tarantino. So instead of doing a whole episode dedicated to talking about the Tarantinoverse, this month we were supposed to do an episode solely about Reservoir Dogs, so we're just going to combine those 2 episodes since we missed that, and we're going to do at the top of this episode a quick overview of the works of Quentin Tarantino before we go into our feature discussion of Reservoir Dogs. So while we will be doing episodes concerning the films that he wrote but did not direct, the crux of this podcast throughout the year is mainly going to be about his 10 films that he wrote and directed. So those 10 films in order are 1992's Reservoir Dogs, 1994 Pulp Fiction, 1997 Jackie Brown, 2003 Kill Bill Volume 1, 2004 Kill Bill Volume 2, 2007 I believe is when Grindhouse came out.
Death Proof?
With Death Proof, yeah. So I think 2006 or 2007, Death Proof. 2009, Inglourious Bastards. 2012, Django Unchained. 2015, The Hateful Eight. And 2019, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And then the films that he wrote but did not direct were, I believe it was 1993 when True Romance came out. 94 Natural Born Killers, which is debatable because of the sheer amount of work that was done to his original script. How much of that film is actually his, I think, is up in the air. But he also contributed the last portion of the film, 4 Rooms, the last part of that anthology, and also From Dusk Till Dawn. So we'll be discussing those as well. Stan, did you put these in any sort of order, favorite to least favorite?
I don't think I have, because lots of times it jumps up and down. We had talked about a lot of the Tarantino stuff during our recap of the Roaring Twenties recaps for the years, because he had several of the greatest movies of the decade or of the 2 decades. I still have to think. What's going to be my definitive Tarantino stuff is the Kill Bill, and I put those 2 together. So he's still running on the 10 films, so he's still got a 10th film to go. But the Kill Bill Volume 1 and Volume 2, I think are my definitive favorites. But Once Upon a Time in Hollywood quickly became kind of supplanted that, and right now it's my favorite film of the last at least 5 years, and especially for his. So it's going to be at least definitely those two examples are going to be at the very top. And if I have a worst, I may be in agreement with you in this one, with Hateful Eight being my least favorite, but I like it a lot more than you did. But his worst stuff is somebody's greatest stuff, so it's like it's really hard to say, that's a really, really, really bad movie. I mean, it's bad for Tarantino, in my idea, or it's one of his lackluster films, but I think he was doing it in revenge or kind of as in spite of somebody or something. And
he definitely was, because he was pissed off about the script getting leaked. And I've seen Hateful Eight once when we went and saw the 70 millimeter roadshow print. I will watch it again, probably the Netflix extended version, because I've got quite a while before we get to that. We're doing a Django and Hateful Eight double feature that's scheduled for November. So we've got quite a bit before we get there. I will definitely watch it again and try to go into it a second time with
new eyes.
New eyes, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Definitely the theatrical version probably is more streamlined, and takes out some segments that may have been really, really, really over the top, relatively for Tarantino. But yeah, you might enjoy the theatrical cut. Well, the extended cut is just the roadshow in 2 parts, so it's like,
right.
You might want to just watch the theatrical cut version of it. In the sense,
Wait, isn't there an extra cut material that was put back into the Netflix version? That's what I understood.
And that's why they split it into episodes.
Yeah, I think they split it into 4-hour-long episodes.
All right. Is that what that movie needed to be? Longer?
Well, honestly, if breaking it up into 4 parts and adding in cut stuff makes it better, then maybe. I'll have to get back to you on that once I actually sit down and watch it. I think it's possible that...
Because you did like the beginning portion of it, and you like parts in the middle, and you kind of... but then it just went off the rails for you. So it's like, in the sense, if it is broken up in the sense of the 4 parts, then yeah, maybe you'll be able to take it on a easier, palette.
Hateful Eight to me was just definitive proof that after the unfortunate death of Sally Menke, his editor for many years, there weren't many people around to tell him no.
No, right.
Hateful Eight was very self-indulgent. It was very overwritten. It was badly in need of trimming, which is, I know, counterintuitive to what I was just saying. To Chris's point, maybe it should have been a lot shorter. It probably should have been a lot shorter. I'm interested to see if this Netflix cut of it actually remedies that. I don't know.
But anyway, since I know we're not talking about that until November, but in the sense of Django Unchained is like really close to the top. It can be like go back and forth with Kill Bill and Once Upon a Time as my favorite, and Inglourious Basterds is up there. It's like 5 or 6 are like right smash dab on the top. Jackie Brown is always going to be a classic for me, because it's his homage to classic movie making, and it's wonderful. Well, I can't say that now because I guess Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is more homage to classic movie making.
Yeah,
but
well, arguably all of his movies are homages to classic Hollywood.
But yeah, so I like Death Proof more than you did, so it's like
Death Proof is a weird one to me because
it is on my bottom.
When taken in context as a double feature with Planet Terror as a part of the whole Grindhouse movie experience, I enjoy it as a whole. Once you put in the fake trailers and everything else,
right.
But it was really weird to me then when they came out on DVD. Grindhouse was split into 2 DVDs, Planet Terror
Yeah.
and Death Proof, separately, not as a whole as it was presented in theaters and as it was meant to be presented, and without the fake trailers. I think they were included as special features. So I tried watching Death Proof on its own, outside the context of
The experience.
and one, the quote unquote director's cut, which is what they released on DVD of both films. The director's cut of Death Proof is also way too self-indulgent. Like it is gratuitous, not in its violence, but in its use of Tarantino-esque, well, not esque, Tarantino dialogue.
Right.
There's a lot of very self-indulgent scenes in that film.
Great car chases, though.
Oh yeah, the car chases in that film are brilliant. But me being me, I had to put these in an order. We spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about lists. For me, top to bottom, it goes Pulp Fiction, number 1. And then Jackie Brown, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Django Unchained, Kill Bill Volume 2. These next 3 are just pretty much interchangeable as far as like giving them a ranking. Inglourious Bastards, Reservoir Dogs, and Kill Bill Volume 1. And then on the bottom, Death Proof by itself, when, again, as viewed as part of Grindhouse, it's enjoyable. And then firmly at the bottom is The Hateful Eight. Now, Chris, out of those 10 films, you've seen Django and Hateful Eight, correct?
Yes, I've seen bits and pieces. Sorry. Yeah, I've seen bits and pieces of the other ones, but never the whole way through.
Okay. So do you have any hard thoughts one way or the other on Tarantino or the TarantinoVerse?
Not really. I don't really care for it.
Okay. Chris is going to be our the barometer for me and Stan's fanboyishness as this goes on. But we hope you'll still, chime in once in a while since you're here.
That's not to say that there's not a charm to it, but it doesn't really work on me all that much.
Yeah. Well, so before we wrap up just the discussion of the Tarantino verse and move into Reservoir Dogs, there's 2 things I want to point out. Actually, 3 now that I'm thinking about it, because Reservoir Dogs is 28 years old. The Tarantino has been a cultural phenom for 28 years now, which is shocking to me to think that I have been a fan of his for 18 years. I saw Reservoir Dogs in 2002, 10 years after its release. I have owned so many copies and different versions of Reservoir Dogs over the years.
It's been early 90s since I didn't see Reservoir in the
at the theater.
At the theater, because I'd saw Pulp Fiction first, and then went, because he was put up there with like the oh my God, what's his name? The Japanese extreme guy, Beat Takeshi. Thank you.
A comedian, by the way.
Yeah, and with fireworks and stuff like that, and he's the guy that ended up doing the samurai films, the Zatoichis.
Yeah, Zatoichi.
Zatoichis.
The Blind Swordsman.
Yes. He was doing gangster films at the same time Tarantino was breaking, and so it's like they were kind of like, and Tarantino is influenced by him, so it's like I saw Reservoir because I had seen Fireworks and Beat Takeshi films and Pulp Fiction, so it's like I went back and rented the VHS copy, for $4.50 a day, blah blah blah, and saw Jackie Brown in the theater, so it's like early 90s for me, and I admit I'm one of the, it's like people have Lucas and Spielberg as their formative directors. It's like mine are Scorsese and Tarantino. It's like I'm admittedly in a Tarantino camp, and I guess coming from Scorsese, that's going to be not totally surprising, but Tarantino is one of my, like I said, he has some of the greatest films of my, life, that I consider great films. So, but yeah, almost 30 years, man.
Yeah.
30 years.
Well, the second thing that I'd like to point out, and a lot of any listeners who are probably uber nerds like me and Stan probably already realize this, but for those who do not, the casual fan, Tarantino splits his films into two universes. A lot of them exist alongside each other. Obviously, Vic Vega from Reservoir Dogs is the brother of Vincent Vega from Pulp Fiction. There's what he considers to be, quote, the realer than real world. And then there's the movie world, in which films like both Kill Bills and From Dusk Till Dawn exist. So the characters in Jackie Brown or Pulp Fiction, actually Jackie Brown is the outlier because it exists in the Elmore Leonard verse.
Exactly.
Alongside Out of Sight. But characters from Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction might go see films like Kill Bill or From Dusk Till Dawn, which is just such a fascinating distinction to me. And the last thing before we move on and start talking about Reservoir Dogs, I want to say is there's a lot of controversy surrounding Quentin Tarantino, the person. There's also a lot of controversy surrounding his films. We're not going to necessarily talk about the person's controversy. I think it's very important to separate the artist from their work in a lot of cases. That's going to be a very hot button topic that we're going to try to avoid. But just for an example, Roman Polanski, bona fide piece of shit. That hasn't stopped me and Katie from watching Rosemary's Baby every year. Tarantino done a lot of questionable, controversial things. That hasn't stopped me from being a very big fan of his work or being very highly influenced by his work. So I wanted to go ahead and address that now before we moved any farther along with this discussion. Anybody have any thoughts?
Oh, nothing. Just that Rosemary's Baby is the longest and scariest apartment tour I've ever seen.
Basically, yeah.
And it finishes with the birth of the devil.
They welcome a new addition.
Spoiler alert, Stan.
Not the devil, the Antichrist. Damn it!
I didn't spoil anything.
No, I think it's no. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, he's the Antichrist.
It's some sort of monstrous beast.
That's why I said the devil.
The beast.
It's the son of the devil.
All right, so for these, we're going to move now on into the discussion of Reservoir Dogs. And to kick this off, for the films that Chris Barnes has not seen, I want to ask you right at the top, what does Chris know about this movie?
Color-coded gangsters commit a heist. They end up it doesn't go well because they end up holed up in a building, and they figure out over the course of the movie one of them is a police informant.
Yeah, that's pretty close.
Yeah.
It is a heist movie without a heist in it. They skip over the heist scene entirely.
The heist isn't important. What the fallout is the most important part.
What's the film that it's I can't say based on, but influenced.
Yeah,
is it
it's
Hidden
influenced
Fortress?
by a lot of different
Literally
things.
lifts from.
It's Kurosawa, right?
I
Hidden
don't know.
Fortress? Am I thinking?
No,
no,
Hidden-
that's Star Wars.
Yeah, Hidden Fortress is Star Wars. The ending of the film specifically is inspired, directly compared to a movie called City on Fire.
City on Fire. Okay, perfect.
A film
Ringo
that
Lau.
Tarantino claims he had not seen and didn't know about, which is questionable. But the description for that film is a maverick undercover cop infiltrates a gang of Hong Kong jewel thieves, but is wounded when the robbery turns into a massacre. Trapped in their hideout, the gang seek to unmask the traitor in their midst. That is the description for City on Fire from 1987, and also the description for Reservoir Dogs from 1992.
Which, in a fun little connection, is also a very early episode of Mystery Science Theater.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it is.
City on Fire? Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's interesting because City on Fire is considered a
No,
great
it's an
movie.
entirely different movie. Same name, different movie.
Oh, okay.
Gotcha. I was going to say that would be an odd one for.
It really would be.
Because City on Fire,
It's a 70s disaster film, never mind.
It's Ringo Lamb, I think, isn't it? Or
Yeah, it is. Starring Chow Yun-fat.
yeah, it's one of the great beginnings of the Hong Kong gangster films. I mean, heavily influenced on Chow Yun-fat's later films, Killer and Better Tomorrow and all that stuff. So
Nothing.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you were going to say something, Chris.
I thought you were. You had your phone up.
Yeah, I was just going to, just so that I don't miss any important names in what would become an all-star cast. They weren't all necessarily at the time. Harvey Keitel, who was pretty widely known, Tim Roth and Michael Madsen, who were relative newcomers, Sean Penn, or I'm sorry, Chris Penn, brother of Sean Penn,
fresh off
Steve Buscemi.
of the Kevin Bacon dancing movie,
Footloose.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
So he was one of the most known.
He's the one who gets the let's hear it for the boy montage.
Yes.
When
He
they
was
wow.
the name of
dance.
the movie.
Full disclosure, I've never seen Footloose.
You really do need to.
As Chris pointed out, Steve Buscemi and Lawrence Tierney. Oh, and Eddie Bunker. Let's not forget Eddie fucking Bunker as Mr. Blue and Tarantino himself as Mr. Brown. We could spend a whole episode just talking about trivia about this movie, and in fact, I had it down on the list, but there's just so much of it. Like Tarantino wrote the role of Mr. Pink for himself before it went to Steve Buscemi. Apparently, Samuel L. Jackson auditioned for the role of Mr. White, which would have been. I feel like that would have made this a completely different film if it was Samuel L. Jackson instead of Harvey Keitel.
Especially with some of the conversations they have in the car and stuff. And well, actually, at the beginning of the movie, which I can't wait to get to.
A thought that had never occurred to me until I was reading the TV tropes for this page. Chris Penn, his character, Nice Guy Eddie, sits out the entire discussion at the beginning of the film about Madonna's Like a Virgin because he'd be talking about his ex-sister-in-law.
Exactly.
That after 28 years after 18 years really since I've seen this film, that thought never once occurred to me. And I wonder if it makes me wonder if Nice Guy Eddie was supposed to have been part of the Like a Virgin discussion, and he was like, hey, listen, I really don't want to be on camera talking shit about my ex-sister-in-law.
Because they were together at the time, weren't they?
What I read said ex-sister-in-law, so I'm assuming Penn
it would have been
and...
the mid-'80s that they were together, so they would have been done yet already. So, because I think he had just got with Robin Wright at the time. So,
I do not know. As we pointed out, it is entirely about the aftermath of this jewel heist, told primarily inside of it looks like a warehouse. Turns out it's actually the back of a funeral home, which is very nice and ominous and fitting for it. And the whole film is trying to figure out what went wrong while also giving us not flashbacks, because apparently Tarantino hates them refer to that, but scenes fleshing out the main characters of the film.
So a scene jumping back to something that happened previously?
Yes, a scene that flashes back to something previous, but not a flashback.
If only there were a handy term for that.
I know.
Look, you can hate it all you want, but it's just a term.
Yeah.
remembrance, memory,
Yeah.
exposition.
That makes it sound like something out of Harry Potter.
I want to see that crossover. There's been so
Guns
much.
would solve so many of Harry Potter's problems.
They really would have. There's been so much talk over the last, I think it's been about 5 years now since it first came up, but Tarantino directing a Star Trek film.
He wanted to.
He did. I want to see Tarantino direct a Harry Potter film.
But he should have been aiming for I mean, I know Disney would never let it happen, but he should have been aiming for Star Wars, because that's more the Wild West type of thing you could do.
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek, he basically said, "I'm throwing out all this crap."
Yeah. So being his first film, this gives us a lot of what would become signatures of a Tarantino film. And I just made up a list as I was thinking of them. Stan, you might be able to contribute more, but Reservoir Dogs introduces us to Tarantino's favorite trunk shot.
Yeah.
When they look at the scene for the first time, when they open up the trunk and look at the cop that Mr. Blonde kidnapped.
One of the greatest moments of true to life surprise from Harvey Keitel and Steve Buscemi's characters when he opens it, because I don't know, because for me, watching it again last night, just the naturalism of Keitel and Steve Buscemi, everything was a surprise. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, and they reacted to stuff so truthfully. So when Michael Madsen, who I've forgotten how much I loved his character in this, Vic Vega, opens up the trunk, there's no light. You know, it's just the trunk opens. It's the camera's on the three guys looking in, and the second and they wait till the trunk gets all the way open, so you can see that they're seeing what's in the trunk, and just this wonderful look of true surprise on both their faces, and Harvey Keitel literally cracking up and truthfully finding the humor in the moment. And it's like, remember when Harvey Keitel was one of the great badasses of filmdom? And it's like, that's what it totally, because there's just so much true naturalism.
You mean before he became a mob boss in Sister Act?
Yes.
Excuse me, Reservoir Dogs also introduced us to Red Apple cigarettes, brand that has appeared in, I think, every single one of his films, and finally got their own commercial during the credits of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
That's right.
These are the worst fucking cigarettes I've ever smoked. It gave us his signature pop soundtrack. This film has no original score. It's entirely 70s and 80s hits, and 60s, 70s, and 80s hits.
And who plays the DJ?
Stephen Wright, playing quite possibly the world's worst DJ.
Or best.
If your DJ was on Xanax. Something that that we're going to discuss in depth in a little bit. It's one of the topics that I broke this film down into, but I'm going to go ahead and bring it up because it is such a staple of Tarantino's works: gratuitous violence. People have just come to expect that from a Tarantino film. Very long conversations between characters, some of which just exist to expand on those characters, and some of which are loaded with foreshadowing. And this also gave us a lot of his regulars that he would continue to work with over the next 28 years. So I want to start by discussing the morally grayest of morally gray characters in quite possibly any of his films, because this film has really zero good guys. Even if you look at Mr. Orange, still complicit in a crime, even though it's part of his job, still a very morally gray character. And again, that's part of him going undercover, is having to assume that mask. And
it's still capable of murder.
Yeah, we see that he's still capable of committing murder.
And I'm not even talking about Michael Madsen's character.
Yeah, you're talking about the woman he carjacks. Yeah. Funny, again, bit of trivia about that. Thanks to TV Tropes, I discovered that was his voice coach.
Really?
The woman playing the driver that they carjack, and she shoots him, and he in turn murders her. Yeah, that was his voice coach, who was apparently incredibly hard on him. So that was his little bit of, he got her a part in the film where he murders her.
She worked, though. His vocal patterns, and Tim Roth, we're talking Tim Roth here.
Yeah.
You do catch a little bit of, his dialect, his original dialect, British dialect, but just the dialect she got, the American dialect that she got from him, is really interesting and really fits his character. The humor of it and the pathos of the character. It's like, so she did a great job getting, even if she was hard on him, she.
Well, side note, we're not really discussing or giving an outline of the plot of this film because it's 28 years old. I'm assuming that most listeners have probably seen it or are aware enough of it to follow along in the discussion. I will say, however, though, that in the most first world of first world fucking problems, I sat down last night to watch this, and I first went to Amazon Prime, not on there, not streaming for free for Prime members. Went to Netflix, not streaming on there, and I was like, God damn it, does this mean I have to walk all the way upstairs, grab one of my many copies, and bring it back down here to watch?
Oh, your problems are significant.
I don't own a copy of Reservoir.
Really? I'll give you one.
With Pulp Fiction, but
how many have you got?
So I had to rent it. I paid $3.99 for it on Prime because it's also if you have a subscription to Epix or whatever, but I don't have that. So.
Yeah, so I bought it when it the 10th anniversary,
Right.
Because I saw it in 2002. I'd rented it from Blockbuster, which is a very old-fashioned sense.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean Mulaney.
And they had just released the 10th anniversary. They had 6 different slipcovers, and I got the Mr. Blonde one. When I started college, my friend Austin had the extremely rare Mr. Brown Tarantino slipcover,
Really?
which I was extremely jealous of. So I had it. I had that, and then there was the 15th. They just keep releasing anniversary editions of this film. In like 2007, they released the gas can edition, which was released in a tin case that was shaped to look like Mr. Blonde's gas can. Then a friend of mine, when he was moving out, gave me a very old copy, like when it first came out on DVD, and it had the cover that you had to had the little thing on the side that you had to open up.
It was when they were cardboard covers, and they had the little plastic clasp on the side.
Yeah, I gave me a copy of that, and then eventually I went ahead and acquired it on Blu-ray. And then I was out somewhere one day and found the Mondo cover steelbook of it. So I think that's 5.
Yes.
And now I don't.
Do you
still
like the
own,
movie?
Oh yeah, just a little bit. I don't still own all of those. I did get rid of 2 copies of it, but I still have that slipcover, the Mr. Blonde slipcover copy, which I'm just never going to get rid of. And I've got the gas can special edition. So,
but yeah, the first world problem thing is like you had to go upstairs,
I had to walk all the way to the upstairs of my home to grab a copy of the Blu-ray to
which
watch.
is literally 20 feet away.
Yeah.
Quentin Tarantino has to be so happy with himself at this point because he's achieved the status that he's looked at other movies with, where people look back at his stuff as the classics.
Oh yeah, very much so.
He's nostalgia for people now.
Yeah. But going back to the discussion of morally gray and yet still likable characters, there's a very, if you think about it beyond just it, the dialogue in the film happens very quickly and then they move on. But there's at one point when Mr. Pink, played by Steve Buscemi, is talking to Mr. White, he says, "Did you have to kill anybody?" And Mr. White says, "Just a couple of cops." And Mr. Pink says, "No real people?" And Mr. White says, "No." Like, these are, at this point, you don't know a whole lot about Mr. Orange at this point, Tim Roth's character. You don't know that he's an undercover cop. At this point, you are still assuming that he is one of the thieves and criminals. At this point in the film, when this dialogue occurs, these are your 2 main protagonists having this discussion. That is an extremely dark series of lines there. Any real people? No, just cops.
And in his line of work, he doesn't think of them as people.
Yeah.
He can't, because he just got to get rid of them.
Well, yeah, and Mr. White, Harvey Keitel's character, while he's combing his hair in the mirror and having the discussion with Mr. Pink, Steve Buscemi, says that, I don't want to kill anybody, but if some poor soul,
motherfucker
gets in front of me and getting away,
yeah,
somebody's gonna go down. It's like, but see, I think he's less gray than you. I think he's closer, because the whole idea of honor amongst thieves, he actually has an honor code.
Yeah. He spends the majority of the film going to bat for Mr. Orange, convincing everyone that he's not the rat, that this man is dying, they need to get him help, they need to do something for him.
And is all over Mr. Vic.
Mr. Blonde.
Mr. Blonde, about what he does, and has said, you were wrong putting me in the same room as this crazy motherfucker. It's like him and Mr. Pink are the only ones that talk about professionalism.
Yes. So, Chris, I don't know if you know, but for backstory, during the robbery, an alarm in the diamond store got set off, which caused Mr. Blonde, Michael Madsen's character, to indiscriminately just start shooting customers, which is what led to things going south.
Gotcha. He lost his cool, and that's no good reason.
But the funny thing is, he didn't lose his cool. It was like systematic execution. It was pop, pop.
So he was mad
pop.
about the fact the alarm went off.
He was mad because the alarm went off. If he wouldn't have done it, nobody would have died.
Well, and it's one of my, again, you want to talk about extremely dark lines, but it's one of my favorite written lines in a Tarantino film or in any recent, I say recent, in the last 30 years work, when Mr. Pink and Mr. White are calling him out on indiscriminately murdering customers when it was just supposed to be an intimidation job. Mr. Blonde says to them, if they hadn't have done what I told them not to do, they'd still be alive.
Right.
It's you're right. There are levels here. There are these shades of gray to these characters. Obviously, you take a look at a character like Mr. White, and obviously you identify and sympathize with him a lot more than Mr. Blonde. It's still, for all that he does, for all that Mr. White does for Mr. Orange, the undercover cop, trying to go to bat for him, there's still there's a flashback to when they were trying to get away after it went wrong, where in a very John Woo moment, Mr. White hears cop cars coming, hears a car coming, and pulls out a second pistol from behind his back and stands in wait. And when the cop car comes around the corner, he stands there and kills both officers shooting through the windshield. Again, this is the protagonist of your film. And at this point, at this point when you see that, it's after the Mr. Orange reveal, but one of the more sympathetic characters in the film.
Exactly. But, and I go back, who do we like in Heat? It's like, Val Kilmer's character and stuff, his job with the crew is basically killing anybody that's coming after them, it's like, but he's like the nicest guy in the whole crew.
Yeah, the comparison to Heat, though, I'm not entirely sure is apt, because in Heat, De Niro's crew is more explicitly thieves.
Right.
And in fact, the only time really near the beginning of the film that establishes they're willing to kill somebody if they have to is when they are willing to kill the guy who started shooting cops
Agreed.
During their first heist.
Agreed.
Most of them are not just, they prefer to be thieves instead of straight up murderers.
Agreed.
Whereas here, this heist crew in Reservoir Dogs are all just straight up willing to murder.
I agreed.
There's the flashback to Mr. Pink's getaway scene where he is running down the streets of LA with cops chasing him. He tries to hijack a car and the cops come around the corner, so he just opens fire on them, wounds one of them, and then drives away. So I just think it is fascinating that for his first film coming right out of the gate, Tarantino created such a unique cast of characters who are simultaneously so unsympathetic and yet still sympathetic characters, and especially when you compare bad versus evil here. Once we get the full extent of how shitty Mr. Blonde is,
and then we get the story of Mr. Blonde and how he's such the great guy to Eddie and his dad.
Yeah,
and it's like, you're expecting me to believe you, who I don't know from Adam, that guy I grew up with and that is a great friend and is wonderful with my dad, and did not rat on us in 4 years.
Chris Penn is so underrated in this movie because so much attention is given to Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, Michael Madsen, and Steve Buscemi, because ostensibly they are the four main characters, but Chris Penn is so goddamn good as nice guy Eddie.
Yep, he's brilliant.
Brilliant. And especially that last third of the movie, the whole, you expect me to believe that this man who did 4 years from us came in here and was going to kill us, and especially his line delivery of "stop pointing that fucking gun at my dad."
Yep.
is just such a raw, natural delivery.
And his daddy's on his way.
Yeah, it's such an underrated performance.
Chris Penn, I was watching, I had forgotten how much I love Chris Penn in this movie, and as I'm watching, I was like, Chris Penn owned the movie once he got into it. Mm-hmm. And like you said, that last third through until that last moment was all Chris Penn and just running it.
And again, we find ourselves talking about bad versus evil here, because he proves that he's every bit on the level with Mr. Blonde. After Blonde tortures and is ready to set this police officer that they captured on fire, and he gets killed by Mr. Orange, nice guy Eddie shows up back to the warehouse with Mr. Pink and Mr. White, and wants to know what the fuck happened while they were gone. And Mr. Orange is trying to lie to them that Blonde said he was going to kill the cop and then kill me and then kill you and get the diamonds. Orange says he was going to kill the cop, and nice guy Eddie says, "You mean this cop?" And then pulls out his gun and executes the police officer that Mr. Orange had just saved. So just with that one action, he is every bit as evil as Mr. Blonde, and we find ourselves again with our good bad characters on one side of the room and our bad characters on the other side. Just such a fascinating dichotomy to me.
And the standoff at the end, man.
The three-way, the Mexican standoff, I don't know if that's still appropriate to say. If that's culturally inappropriate, I'm sorry. That's just what it's commonly known as. But the three-way shootout at the end there between... We haven't talked a lot about Lawrence Tierney, apparently, who was just a terror to work with on set, from what I was reading last night. But it comes down to he is nice guy Eddie's dad, Joe Cabot. Finally, after seeing him mainly in flashbacks, shows up at the warehouse at the end of the film. The standoff between him and Mr. White and nice guy Eddie over just trying to stop the execution of Mr. Orange, who has been found out. One of my favorite all-time technical gaffes, because Stan, did you ever notice that no one actually shoots nice guy Eddie? No? Because Joe shoots Mr. Orange, which causes Mr. White to shoot Joe, which causes Eddie to shoot Mr. White. No one actually shoots Eddie. When they set off all the squibs on Tierney, Keitel, and Roth, they went ahead and just they accidentally set off the squib on Penn too, so he just reacted as if he'd been shot and fell over. And they used the take in the film. So in the finished film...
Could have been Mr. Pink, who was hiding underneath the ramp.
Well, considering...
he went and got his bag.
Yeah, considering he was hiding underneath the ramp.
He took advantage.
Yeah. No, it was...
Ghost Cop,
yeah. Apparently it was supposed to be White shoots Joe as gets shot by Eddie and then turns and shoots Eddie as he's falling. That didn't happen, though.
So Harvey Keitel forgot, but they still were expecting to blow the squib.
Yeah, the squibs just all went off at the same time.
My gaff, though, I didn't really notice that one, but my gaff is, remember Mr. Pink and Mr. White were supposed to each take a car, but nobody took Mr. Blonde's car. So he was able to get the gas can from his car. I was like, who took?
That's a good point.
Because
I have never thought about
Eddie
that.
Eddie took his car.
Yeah.
And
to bring White and Pink back after they ditched the cars they stole.
They were supposed to take each, so it wouldn't look like. I can't say that. Wouldn't look like a Mexican car lot. We haven't talked about how a lot of the classic Tarantino verge of inappropriateness is in this movie.
Oh, I'll talk about that in a second. Chris, what did you want to say?
I'm sorry. I feel like Mexican Standoff is not inappropriate, since it just describes a type of situation that isn't inherently racist.
Yeah, Mexican Car Wash, on the other hand,
that one,
a little less culturally appropriate. I forgot to add to my list of Tarantino first things that he set a standard for here that we would see reoccurring, and that is casual racism.
Exactly.
I always forget when I watch this film just how casually racist everybody but Mr. Orange is. I think he's the only speaking character in the movie who does not use the N-word. Literally everyone else does at some point in the film.
What's his obsession with this?
From what I understand, I could be wrong about this, but he grew up in a primarily black neighborhood around a lot of black friends, and it just became part of his cultural experience.
All right, but
it's like the whole Hulk Hogan. Well, it's what Hogan tried to claim was his. Right. I'd just been using the word for years.
I'm not saying Tarantino himself is racist.
Right.
My curiosity is, why is he so fixated on this?
I don't know.
At least with Django and Hateful Eight, it was historical.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, not to get too much into it, but this is Los Angeles in 1992.
Right.
Fair.
I'm sure that...
And that's where I think the City on Fire influence is really heavy, is the fact that he's responding to what was happening and going on there as well.
That does make it all the more curious, though, that the cop doesn't say it.
Well,
that's
his partner, his handler, is a black man.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if he's credited in the movie.
Yeah, he is. Because ironically, Samuel L. Jackson also then went on to audition for that role and still didn't get it. I think, again, this could be just internet trivia bullshit, but apparently that's why he got cast as Jules in
I could see
Pulp
that.
Fiction.
I could see that being a makeup for him.
Yeah, because Tarantino, he auditioned for 2 different roles, and Tarantino didn't cast him in either of them, but liked him and said...
And which is another thing, is that the guy who has Tarantino's back and all this controversy with, casual racism or whatever, happens to be Samuel L. Jackson, who also started with the director that is the most vocal about picking on Tarantino, because he started with Spike Lee films.
Yeah.
So it's like, but Samuel L. Jackson's went, no, this is how we talk. Let us talk this way. And so, but I again go with your point, Chris, about, the historicalness of it for Django and Glorious.
It's something that'll be more prevalent about him in Pulp Fiction.
Yeah. So it has been a minute. I've seen Pulp Fiction dozens of times. It's been a minute since I watched it, but up to a certain point in Pulp Fiction, the word is only ever said by Samuel L. Jackson, who is well known for saying that word a lot anyway, until you get to the character that Tarantino himself plays,
right,
who just casually throws it out.
Not pointedly.
Pointedly, yeah.
Because I have not seen that movie all the way through, but I've seen parts, and I've seen that part, and it's just...
Yeah, it's jarring.
Weird. It's weird.
Yeah.
That he makes a point of saying it like that.
Yeah. And again, hate to call it a product of its time, but this was the early 90s.
94, I think.
Yeah.
And they do get comeuppance.
It's not like these are, aside from Tarantino's character, who is otherwise presented as supposed to be a nice guy in Pulp Fiction, none of the characters who are casually racist throughout Reservoir Dogs are nice guys in any way possible, despite
none of the
Nice Guy Eddie's moniker.
None of and any of his films really survive, if you think about it. You know, they pretty much buy it. I mean, and what's the first movie that he doesn't go casually racist is his last one.
Yeah, well,
except for maybe
it's not used. The word is not used in the Kill Bill films either. But again,
but there is the racism against whether you're Chinese or Japanese, or there is some definite, especially when we get to what's her face. Well, we can talk about.
Yeah, we'll get to Kill Bill in I don't know, August. Looking at my list here. So moving on from morally gray characters and casual racism, Reservoir Dogs is part of the whole of the Tarantino verse. Again, gave us Red Apple cigarettes. It also, as I mentioned briefly earlier, gives us the Vega brothers, because Mr. Blonde's real name, played by actor Michael Madsen, Mr. Blonde's real name is Vic Vega. And he is the brother of John Travolta's Pulp Fiction character, Vincent Vega. And for a long time, Tarantino wanted to do a spin-off film about the two of them, and now both of them have gotten way too old to make that work.
And then both characters are now dead, so it would have to be a total. They would have to cast really.
Yeah, it would have been set in the late 80s, early 90s, presumably, which, again, good luck making that work now.
Boy, if he doesn't like the word flashbacks, I'm sure he hates the word prequel.
Yeah. So the original plan for the briefcase from Pulp Fiction that Jules and Vincent are out to deliver to Marcellus Wallace was originally supposed to be the diamonds from this film before he decided not to show what was in the briefcase. And then the most interesting one to me, because there's a weird, this is one of the weirder tie-ins, during Mr. White's first flashback, when you see him talking to Joe Cabot, Lawrence Tierney's character, Joe is asking Mr. White what's been going on, what he's been up to, and he says that he had been doing some work and been in an implied relationship with a woman named Alabama. And Alabama is not exactly a common name for a woman, meaning he has to be talking about the same Alabama from True Romance, which is a film that Tarantino wrote and we will be discussing, but did not direct. That was directed by Tony Scott. So I just think that's interesting, the crossover there, that at some point, Mr. White worked with Alabama Whitman from True Romance, presumably before she met Christian Slater's character from that film.
And he does bring up a Marcellus character.
Yeah, that's right. He does mention Marcellus.
I don't know if it's the Marcellus White.
I think it can be a
different last name.
I think it can probably be assumed that they are.
That's what I wanted to do. I'm like, but it's not the same last name, so can I? And it's like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to the next topic of discussion. Violence now versus violence then. Because this film has such a strong reputation for its violence, when realistically, when you look at it, there's not a whole lot of on-screen violence. There's some shootouts, characters get shot, but primarily what everyone remembers about this movie is Mr. Blonde cutting off the police officer's ear.
You don't see it.
Which doesn't actually happen on screen. And I remember, I saw, like I said, I saw this film in 2002. And as I've mentioned on this podcast many times, I grew up watching movies that were not appropriate for my age. Very young, I was watching things like Terminator and RoboCop. I've been seeing explicit violence in films as long as I've been watching films. This scene had no effect on me. And yet, from what I was reading last night, it caused Wes Craven, director of such films as The Last House on the Left and Scream and Nightmare on Elm Street, to walk out of the theater.
The guy who put people on the ceiling with blood.
Again, could all be internet bullshit, but I remember, so my brother is a big horror fan, big Stephen King fan, loved the Nightmare on Elm Street films, the Friday the 13th, Halloween's, all of those films. He had never seen Reservoir Dogs. So I was spending a weekend with him and his husband, and I was like, hey, you've never seen this, let's watch it. And they wanted to turn it off after the ear-cutting scene, which was just so surprising to me that somebody who was such a big horror fan, who liked all these franchises, would be so disturbed by this. And so many people had such a huge reaction to the ear-cutting scene.
That's not surprising to me.
Okay, so what is it that makes...
Because it's real?
It's a judicious application of violence. Horror movies and action movies, there is a level of, this is so crazy, you can't really latch onto it in your head. You know, you talked about the Blood Guys or Nightmare on Elm Street.
So it's suspension of disbelief, essentially.
It is. This is, and specifically since this is not any type of real action movie, this is more of a intense thriller in one location. This is
and there's build up, and
this is the unleashing of human nature.
Yeah.
This is when it's very personal. When Mr. Blonde straps that man down and very calmly turns on some music, and slices his ear off.
Yeah.
That is visceral.
Okay.
And that's more psychological. Your brain can let stuff like huge amounts of gore bounce off because it's such an in-your-face application of this wouldn't really happen, but it's cool to watch.
And what's funny, yeah, and because it's probably the least gory
Oh yeah,
of all the violence, because you don't see a splatter.
Django has a shootout scene in it that is ridiculous.
It's you. The camera pans away. You don't see a splatter. It pauses on shadows. You don't even see a shadow of an ear getting cut off or anything. And then it comes back and he's dancing. He's walking around with the ear, but there's no blood gushing or anything like that. And then even when they show the side, that's like the least gory part of.
There's a line
of the actor's face. It's like we do see when he slices his face. And that's more gory than the actual sight of the ear. And I think that's purposeful, but I agree with you, the idea that it was the build-up and the what we had to imagine.
Yeah, it's a Hitchcock kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a line where what you see in terms of violence and action and stuff like that will pass into cartoonish. And your brain will process it a lot easier. But that's true crime, what happens. You'll hear about that in a Forensics Files episode.
Right.
That's this is disturbingly real to what bad men will do.
Okay. It's a perspective that I've never thought about before, because I've always just thought of that scene in the context of being in a movie, and like I said, having myself been exposed to gratuitous violence in films for a very long time, I never understood the distinction between those two things, but that makes a lot of sense.
That feeling, it's what made the evil dentist scene in Running Man such a thing too, because it's like you're strapped down to a dentist chair and he's sitting there and calmly talking to you as he's about to just mutilate you. That idea of this guy's going to try and relate to you on a human level, as he clearly doesn't consider you a human, and is just about to just. You
mentioned the violence in Django. A man literally explodes in that film, and that man is played by Tarantino.
Well, that crosses
After
over with why does he fixate on it? At least it's historical. He plays an Australian slave trader
with a very questionable Australian dialect,
and he pays for it.
who eventually accidentally picks up a lit piece of dynamite and goes kerblooey.
Well. It's not lit. He's just holding a box of dynamite when Django happens to shoot it.
Right. It's been a while since I've seen that part, but he goes kerblooey.
Yeah,
literally.
And again, we were talking about the distinction between these two scenes and these two acts of horrific violence. Cutting off that cop's ear caused people to walk out of the theater or turn off the movie.
Yeah.
In Django, Tarantino literally explodes and the audience burst into laughter.
There's also the thing that the guy who lost his ear,
because it was played as a comedic beat.
As a comedic beat, and the violence perpetrated on this particular character. This is the only character that's actually can be considered good. And he's
just doing his job.
He's doing his job, and he ends up dying. So it's relentless, and the evil is relentless, and it's like my whole bit with Glenn getting killed in Walking Dead. It kind of like there's no moral center left.
Yeah.
And
it kind of plays to you pointing out Mr. Pink's line, "So no real people." Then it's like you still know that those are people, and those are cops just trying to do their job. To them, they're nothing. And it doesn't really contextualize it till Mr. Blonde cuts his ear off.
Exactly. And like the effect that the opening of Saving Private Ryan has on people, especially people that were there or whatever, the reality of it, the realness of it, the fact that Spielberg is actually taking moments and recreating them directly and completely truthfully, and who he has laid out on the beach at the end of the scene and stuff like that, and that's a long 20 minutes to endure, and there were many people that couldn't even finish that 3-hour movie after seeing that 15 minutes of that scene, and it's like, because they were the good people. They were the ones that were supposed to live, and
they were the protagonists. And see, that I think that's what can make people walk out, is the fact that you've been watching, the camera's been pointed at these people the whole time. You've been in some way bonding with them. You know they're not good people, but in some way you've bonded with them because the camera's been on them. You've had time to experience what charm they can give you. You can kind of be like, okay, they're the people we're following. You'll form some kind of attachment, and then he does that.
Yeah.
It's like, it would be like me and you in a room, and you suddenly commit some horrific violent act, and then be like, "You want to get some lunch?" And
well, there is another great delivery by Harvey Keitel. There's a scene in the film where Mr. Orange and Mr. White are sitting in White's car across the street from the diamond wholesaler, and Mr. Orange is asking him questions because White is the seasoned thief of the two of them, and Mr. White goes on to give him this brilliantly delivered monologue about what to do if people aren't cooperating with you. And he ends the monologue by discussing if somebody in the store is giving you shit, pop them in the nose with the butt of your gun. They'll fall down screaming, blood will go everywhere. It'll scare the shit out of everyone. If it's a manager, they know better than to fuck around. So if they do, cut off one of their fingers, the pinky, and then they'll tell you anything you want. I'm hungry. Let's go get a taco.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just such a...
And then we have the second scene where you don't actually see the violence happen, is at the end of the movie, after Orange admits to White that he's a cop, and the cops that are coming in, and the camera pans in. It's a close-up on Harvey's upper half, and he's got the gun and he shoots, but you don't know if he actually... You have to assume he killed an ex, because the cops are saying, drop it, don't do it. If you pull the trigger, we're killing you. And so you hear the gunshot, and you got to assume it's his because he's then shot after that. But you don't actually see, but that's going to be the moment that affects you, is he just killed Orange, who we dealt with.
It sounds like, from what I'm hearing, he's supposed to be representative of a criminal with a code.
Yeah.
Yes. But that code also includes what to do if you have to start killing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Stan, thank you for that, because that was the perfect segue to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is whether or not you have a favorite scene or a shot or a setup or anything in the film, because what you described is perfectly something that I've saw this film 18 years ago. I've seen it countless times since, and I caught something in my rewatch in preparation for this that I had never caught before, because I originally wrote it down as just, wow, I love the way the shot is framed. There's a section of the whole discussion between Pink and White when they're in the bathroom. It's after they come out of the bathroom. They're discussing what to do with Mr. Orange. He said he wanted to be taken to a hospital. They're talking about just dropping him off in front of one and driving off. And while Mr. Pink is talking, there's a shot that is perfectly centered on Mr. White. And when he starts talking, the shot pushes in on him. And it starts very wide, giving Harvey Keitel a lot of headroom. And if you've ever looked at the way that Tarantino's films are shot, especially close-ups, he's a big fan of the extreme close-up.
Yeah.
So this shot starts out very wide. I know the audience at home can't see what I'm doing with my hands.
They're very wide.
Yeah. Kind of miming the way the shot is framed, but as he is talking, the shot pushes in on him until it is just his upper torso and head in frame. And I loved this shot. Watching it again, like, goddamn, that is such a beautifully framed shot. The motion, the Steadicam is so smooth. And then what you were just discussing, after the shootout, nice guy Eddie is dead, Joe is dead, Mr. White is dying. He goes and he cradles Mr. Orange's body, and Orange confesses to him, I'm a cop.
I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry. White lets out this like half moan, half whine. It's like listening to an animal die.
Yep.
It's so disturbing, the sound that Mr. White lets out. And he picks up his gun, and he doesn't put it even to Mr. Orange's like temple or anything. He's holding it just under to the side of his jaw.
Yep.
This is going to be a very painful gunshot because it's going to go through his jaw, through the top of his head. And the camera starts slowly doing that exact same push in until the bottom of the frame is just past where you would see Mr. Orange's head. It's set up and framed exactly the same until it's ending on Mr. White's head and upper torso. As in the background, you hear the police come in, screaming at him to drop his gun.
Great work from the second ADs and stuff, sending the off-camera police in at the same, or whoever was doing the off-camera work to get in there at the right time, and so Tarantino can just focus, or whoever was doing the DPing, just that's all you need to do. You don't have to worry about anybody coming in. We'll get them in on time. You just get to where you need. Really great second unit work, I thought, throughout the whole thing, man. But yeah.
Interesting. So Stan, with that said, that's my favorite thing, and that's a more recent thing that I've noticed. You rewatched it again yesterday. Does anything stand out to you? Any favorite scenes, lines, anything like that you want to talk about?
I'm going to go back. It's always been, it's the thing that's talked about, but the opening sequence around the dining table where they're talking about Madonna and the why
Dick. How many dicks is that? That's a lot of dicks.
And it's also the introduction of Tarantino's destruction of the 180-degree rules, where he's able to do the full, taking everybody, and they don't have to cut dialogue or anything. You're gonna see everybody doing what they're doing at that moment in time, and just the whole like a virgin explain. And is it Steve Buscemi that says it? John Holmes, motherfucker.
No, it's Tarantino.
It's that's right.
It's part of his
Tarantino's
entire thesis about the true meaning of the song, Like a Virgin.
John Holmes, motherfucker, will still always be
one of your favorite lines.
One of the favorite lines. And then another, which foreshadows that ending moment we just discussed, is the scene in the car where after Orange has been shot, and it foreshadows the moan that you're talking about, because he's, talk to me, you're not gonna die. He has this really interesting cry, scream, moan delivery of his lines. It's like, and that's what I was talking about. It's like just the reality of and the naturalism of what they did. It's like, there's a lot of improv and stuff going on throughout, but the reactions and the true moments of surprise these actors had with each other, and what came out of that, and Tim Roth just holding his gun. I'm gonna die, Larry, I'm gonna die. So it's really bad. And he said, it's not good. So that moment, that first scene in the car, to set up that last moment, and see, it's like stuff like that always is, I want to, and I know it's the wrong word, but counterpoint to all the, the casual racism that we talk about and the controversy that Tarantino has around him. It's like, yeah, he might have that moment, but then he supplants it and totally tops that moment with this true moment of anguish and humanity that even these people that you are disgusted by still can show. And I think he may introduce that, I guess we'll keep calling it casual racism, but he always knows he's going to top it with true humanity and
it's just the reality.
Equality.
It's just the reality of life. I mean, these are bad people who do terrible things, but they're still people.
Exactly.
And they've made bonds and they've made friends, and they have their own banal little lives.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's the banality of evil. It's just like that's why the conversations they have are so important. It's like these are still people. It's like when you see terrible people from history, and it's like you want to just believe, they were just evil demons all the time. It's like, no, they had lives and friends and social circles.
This is what's always fascinated me about Rob Zombie, and specifically The Devil's Rejects, what he does with the Firefly family in that film. I remember watching it the first time and being fascinated by the progression of those characters and how they are presented right out of the gate as being absolutely the worst examples of humanity, as being murdering psychopaths, and then you spend an hour and a half with them interacting with each other, and it's
a deep love.
It's these are terrible people who love each other and are not just full-time 24-hour psychopaths and villains. And to the point where by the end of the film, you're almost like you want to see them get away, which is so counterintuitive to everything you've just watched. Yeah. And I had this discussion with my best friend Nick, who I was living with in college at the time, and we watched the film, and he's like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Those were horrible people. I wanted to see them die at the beginning. I was glad when they died at the end. And I was like, oh, all right. I guess that's the effect of good writing right there, because we had such wildly different reactions.
It's kind of weird, but it's like when we anthropomorphize something. Like, at logically in the back of your head, like, say, like a rock, you're holding a rock, and it's
the Jeff Winger joke from Community, where he holds up a pencil and he says, if I tell you that this pencil's name is Jerry and that it has a family, and then he snaps it in half, and everyone at the table goes,
exactly. It's that kind of thing. I don't know the exact term, but it is a certain level of empathy, because you see these people presented as the worst, and then they're like, oh, there is a good side to them. Yeah, but they only have that good side to them because they found what is essentially their safety and family, what they can feel like they can truly be vulnerable around. With the rest of the world, they're going to kill them. Mm-hmm. They're the terrible villains that you think they are. But it's just that level of empathy in all of us. It's like, see, there is something good in there. Let maybe there's a way to make that bigger than the worst. And it's like, there's not with some people.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we move on to our last topic, sorry, go ahead.
I did want to jump in with Stan talking about the talk scene. I have seen the tipping monologue.
Yeah, that's what I was about to bring up.
Oh, okay.
That whole opening scene, from the Madonna's Like a Virgin discussion into Joe's address book discussion into the Mr. Pink doesn't tip discussion, is a screenwriting masterclass. Because I talked at the beginning about how sometimes Tarantino's dialogue it seems like it exists for the sake of existing. But
that man, if he could simply make a career just padding out everyone else's movies with, just things for characters to talk about.
But these conversations that they're having, even the Like a Virgin discussion, there is so much character establishment right off the bat. You immediately get a sense of every single one of these main characters.
I saw a breakdown of that, yeah.
Which goes straight through to Mr. Pink's not tipping waitresses. That conversation firmly establishes everything you need to know about these characters, right down to the fact that when Joe comes back to the table and immediately notices that somebody didn't tip, Mr. Orange immediately rats out Mr.
Yeah,
Pink.
that's the thing I saw. Is like everyone establishes basically, if you're paying attention, the movie can be spoiled for you, because like Mr. Orange is the squealer.
Yeah.
Every bit of that every bit of that scene establishes what you need to know about the characters.
Mm-hmm.
But what's great is you don't really notice this off the bat, but Mr. Pink gets a great deal of admiration and respect for Mr. Orange. For the rest of the film, he's laughing and joking with Mr. Orange. He's actually part of Mr. White's. He wants to help Mr. Orange in his way. It's like, because there's a flashback scene where they're they've just picked up Mr. Orange for the first time, and Mr. Pink's in the car in the back seat, and they're like laughing and joking with each other, and it's this almost brilliant relationship. And I have to believe it came out of that discussion at dinner, that Mr. Orange didn't really because he asked the questions to Mr. Pink about why don't you tip, don't you think they deserve? It's like if they do a great job. He indulged him, and then he wasn't mad that Mr. Orange ratted him out to Joe. He's like, but because it's you, Joe, and you made that point, I'll throw in a buck, But there wasn't like, oh, you're on my hit list now. It was almost this gain of, or maybe the flashback was before that, so they had established that friendship already. But it was almost I respect you for calling me out on that.
Ironically, that discussion that they have in the backseat of Eddie's car is about who played Christy Love on TV, and that it wasn't Pam Grier. She played Christy Love in the movie. 2 movies later, Pam Grier is starring as Jackie Brown.
Yeah. So the tipping thing, I wanted to ask: do you think? I mean, I don't, and maybe I guess even the Like a Virgin one. Do you think those are just things that, like, do you think they're an author tract? Do you think they're like it's Tarantino slipping in his opinions as well?
I think Like a Virgin is 100% a Tarantino.
I was just wondering that, especially now when I didn't know he was originally supposed to be Mr. Pink.
Yeah, I don't think Tarantino.
I just wonder that because it's something similar because Kevin Smith uses Silent Bob in that way as well,
right?
Especially in Chasing Amy.
I don't think the no tipping is necessarily a Tarantino tract.
I would argue even if it was, it may not be something he thinks anymore. It's just one of those things. But I get what you're thinking. It's kind of an interesting line between he's really good at using that to fill out character, or while also slipping in personal opinions.
It's always bothered me that during his argument in favor of not tipping, Mr. Pink says they make minimum wage.
Ugh.
No, they don't.
No.
At no bar anywhere, no bar or restaurant or diner.
They're allowed to get away with not giving them minimum wage because they rely on the tipping system.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on to our final topic of discussion before we wrap up this episode. Stan, favorite use of music, because this film is the first of many of Tarantino's pop culture soundtracks. Probably the most famous known usage of "Stuck in the Middle with You," to the point where if you hear that song, most people are going to think of a cop getting his ear cut off. I do like that
about his movies, even though I'm not one to sit down and watch them all the way. I like that idea though, because for me, it's also the same for me as like when I'm listening to music, or when I'm thinking about things, I think of particular songs as touch points, and that's a brilliant thing to do.
Yeah. So do you have a favorite usage of music in the film?
It definitely is like it's the first of everything, it's definitely where he's purposely using music and sound as a character, another character in the film, and that he's personally involved in the soundscape of his stuff, and it's like that's why I think he cast Stephen Wright. And it's like, you're just a voice, dude. Don't worry about it. And it's like, because once that Stuck in the Middle with You comes on,
I'm pretty sure that was his own personal joke, because I know Stephen Wright's comedy, and it's just like the idea of that man being a DJ whose job is to keep the momentum up. Is hilarious.
And it wasn't. I was watching the movie, and my mind immediately went to that moment when he turns it on and that song started. It was even before the dance started. I was like, oh, I know what's happening. Yeah. So, and I was watching the film at the time. But what was my favorite? Of course, Stuck in the Middle is a classic example, but there was
I have the soundtrack pulled up on my phone so I could remember the name of the song that I was thinking about. But of course, it opens with Little Green Bag by the George Baker Selection, Stuck in the Middle with You, Steelers Wheel, I Gotcha by Joe Tex, Fool for Love by Sandy Rogers, Hooked on a Feeling by Blue Suede.
Hooked on a Feeling was a great moment.
Also famously ends with Coconut by Harry Nilsson.
Yes.
Harvest Moon by Bedlam.
They have 2 songs in that, because I also did watch the credits come up.
And Magic Carpet Ride, the Bedlam.
But I love, and I think that was the point where I said, okay, because I had seen Pulp Fiction. It's like, great use of music, blah blah blah. But then you go back and you see where that starts in Reservoir and how he uses it. And I've got to say, Reservoir's use of music is what influenced Rockstar to do the Grand Theft Auto music listing stuff.
Oh, I don't doubt it at all.
Unless that came first, but the way GTA uses music is the same way Tarantino uses music, and I think that's remarkable. I don't know any other director, even amongst my favorites, that use music so personally in a personal way.
Yep.
Like, scores are good, but I like the way he handles it.
And I'm even thinking his scores in his later stuff is very personal choices of what's going to happen here, and what song is going to be played, or what sound thing is going to happen. And that's all started with the Reservoir.
Well, as for one favorite musical moment in the film, for all of the famous songs that are used, I'm going with the Fool for Love by Sandy Rogers usage when Mr. Orange is getting ready to go out with Mr. Pink and Mr. White and Nice Guy Eddie, just because of the sheer dichotomy. Because here we've got this classic country or country adjacent song playing while this undercover cop, who is in his own way a badass and putting on a persona of an even bigger badass, is getting ready to go out with a bunch of badass thieves and criminals. In here, he's in his home listening to a country song. I just think the usage is brilliant.
And it was live. It was in the scene.
Diegetic.
Diegetic.
Stop poking my desk.
Sorry, but he turns off the machine,
Yeah.
pops the tape out, and then stops at his door. Has to
psych himself
up even more. That is also
your fucking Beretta.
Your fucking Beretta, and goes down, and then whatever his two backups in the car behind.
Yeah, started listening to Hooked on a Feeling.
We don't know them anymore after that.
No, you never even see their faces.
He's got balls of steel to do what he's doing. You know? It's like,
well, it's also one of the weirdest lines, because one of the cops says of Mr. Orange, he's got rocks in his head the size of Gibraltar, and I'm like, what a weird fucking thing to say about somebody.
I get it though, because it's the whole idea of the line between bravery and stupidity.
Yeah.
Paper thin, so it's like you got to have the same amount of courage to do either thing.
Yeah,
and I gotta assume that one of them is his handler. Right? Am I wrong in that, or
no? It just sounded like two
random.
Two beat cops is what it sounded like, or two off-duty cops. I don't know,
but they were supposed to follow him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they're the ones that they're waiting on when they get back to the warehouse, right? That he said when he tells the other cop that there's a set of cops coming in, or they reported it.
Yeah, well, this is an earlier point, because this is at least a few days pre-robbery, because...
So we never see them again.
No, we never see those two particular cops that are watching him when he leaves his apartment.
Which to me is a brilliant choice too, because...
you could just have anybody sitting in that car.
Yeah, and they gave just enough exposition to fill the moment of him walking from his apartment to the car. Mm-hmm. And I do have to admit, a favorite moment is during Steelers Wheel, when after he does the ear, he walks out. Also diegetic, because closes the door. It gets quieter the closer he gets to the door. Cuts off when he goes outside, gets the gas can, and picks up where it would have been realistically where it would have picked up. Yeah, I love that as well. And I give Sally Menke credit for that. But again, great AD work. Yeah, I can't remember if this is where he and Menke started or not. She was the editor. I'm not sure. She was listed as the editor for it. Yeah. Okay, so that is where their working relationship started. Nice. All right. Well. Unless either of you guys have anything else, that is going to wrap up our discussion of Reservoir Dogs. I I started watching, and I texted you this. It's like, fucking holds up, man.
Yeah.
It's still, it's 30 years on down, and the words still work. The actions, the moments, the mystery still works. You know, the thriller aspect of it. You're still, the whodunit stuff is still.
It's easy
powerful.
to forget that for more than half of the film, the question of, is one of them a rat? Is one of them a cop? Is very real.
Yes.
And for first-time viewers, sitting down and watching this movie for the first time after Mr. Orange kills Mr. Blonde and tells the cop, I'm a cop. That is a huge moment and a huge reveal for that character. And so it's kind of taken for granted now. If you've seen the film or if you even know the spoilers for it, but for a completely spoiler-free audience watching it for the first time, I'm sure that was a huge...
I totally knew, and I'm still, okay, when's this going to happen? How's it going to happen? You know, it's like...
That's always the sign of a good movie is a spoiler won't matter because you'll want to know how it happens.
Exactly. So, yeah, it totally holds up. It's still in the rankings of... Especially for first films, breakouts. I mean, Desperado in this.
Yeah. Well, technically, El Mariachi.
El Mariachi.
Yeah, it was Robert Rodriguez's first film.
And then
This is, whether you like it or not, how you come out swinging.
Yes.
All right. Well, for fans of our sister show, This Is a Work, we've got WrestleMania coming up very soon, and that is guaranteed to be really fucking weird.
Is it happening?
You don't know. It is happening. Now, what they've had to do with all their regular shows...
So there's going to be nobody...
it's going to be the Performance Center empty, and it's going to be over 2 nights.
Over 2 nights. And
this has never happened
before. They can't have
before.
a Royale, though. Well, are they going to do a Royale?
They're trying to limit it, but they are going to have a 6-woman
as long as it's not more than 10.
Yeah, basically. I want someone to... I really want someone to scream social distancing and then deliver a super kick.
Right. So you got that coming up to look forward to.
We don't know how we're going to do it yet.
We're still discussing it with Dogs about how we want to do this. We want to break it up.
Oh my God.
6 feet between us. Yeah. Now that we are into March and the Long Walk Talks has picked up again, we're going to continue this discussion and we're going to be moving on with our schedule roughly the same.
You have been warned.
April will be Pulp Fiction. However, our next episode, I said that these were going to be, the Tarantino discussion was going to be every other episode. So our next episode that will come out in early April will be unrelated to Tarantino. And then after that, we'll have Pulp Fiction, and it'll go on like that for the rest of the year. So be on the lookout for all that upcoming content for us, and we hope that you are staying safe and sane throughout your social distancing. Chris, if anybody out there online wants to find you or follow you or reach out to you, how can they do that?
You dick. It's like you and Dogs bring this up for one reason.
I was going to leave that solely as this is a work joke. I just wanted to open up to you for people to...
Good. This is a parallel universe where you respect me.
Yes.
My Twitter handle is Chris the OK. If you just want to... I really don't use much else, so if you want to bother me on there, it's no problem.
All right. And
I can tweet at you?
Yes.
And you have an Instagram as well, don't you?
I do.
Why do you look at me like I'm trying to trap you in something?
It feels like a trap, Dave.
It's a trap.
It feels like I do. I'm going to be honest. I don't plug it because I barely use it.
Gotcha.
I have it just to... Same reason I have Facebook, to just keep an eye on all of you.
Well, Stan...
I don't have an Instagram.
I know you don't. You don't have a Twitter.
Tweet.
Yeah. So you're
Stan?
social media distancing.
Yeah.
All right.
He's been preparing for this
Facebook.
for years.
If you want to yell at Stan, you can do that through either me or Chris.
Do you know how long it took me to get him to accept my friend invite on Facebook?
I accepted, though.
All right. Well, if you want to follow me online, you can reach out to me on Instagram at DBHensley. I have a Twitter, like Long Walk Productions has a Twitter. We haven't used it in literally years, but if you feel like sending me a message, that's at Long Walk Pro. The easiest way to get a hold of us will probably be through our Facebook page. You can go to Long Walk's Facebook, facebook.com/LongWalkPro. or you can search for the podcast fan page, which is Long Walk Talks ampersand This Is a Work. And through there, that's probably the best way, the easiest way to find the links to our YouTube channel, both as a Long Walk Productions and as this podcast. You can also look in the show notes for this episode and previous episodes for those links to YouTube. So you can listen to older episodes of the podcast and you can see more of our original content. So Chris, Stan, thank you. I'm happy that Long Walk is back. I'm sorry that it took a Quarantino to get us all here together today.
It sounds like some weird snack.
It does.
I'm hungry for a Quarantino.
All right. Well, thank you guys for being on here with me. Thanks
for
listeners.
discussing this. This was a good time.
Thank you, listeners, for rejoining us. And we'll see you again, or you'll hear from us again, I suppose, is the correct.
If you see us, it's too late.
Yeah. You'll hear from us again in a few weeks.
Peace out.